Okay.
In every revolution, there's one man with a vision.
You can't handle the truth.
Welcome, folks. This is Truth versus News for August 26th. August 26th. My golly, where did summer go? Everything's turning so fast here. We're just going through things. This weekend, the news is just great with the G7 and everything happening. And we've got two people here to really give us the best of the news and the true news here. That's Professor Jim Fetzer, the most dangerous mind in America, and Scott Bennett, the Army PSYOPs officer who knows what really has happened to bring us to this point. So, Jim, let's go into that G7 and see what happens here.
Thank you, Don. Thank you. Doubt over China, trade war, and rifts over Iran dominate the G7 summit of world leaders, which was being held in France. Mixed signals over the trade war with China, rifts over Iran dominated the opening of the summit with the world's most powerful democracies. Trump expressed frustration over pre-summit media reports focusing on his status as an outlier among the G7 on numerous issues. Differences were serious enough in playing the summit. Macron, president of France, jettisoned plans for the traditional joint statement from the 7 leaders, figuring getting them all on the same page would be difficult, if not impossible. Meanwhile, Trump, and this was to me quite fascinating, suggested that the group ought to readmit Russia to restore the G8. It didn't go down well. During the meal, President Macron and European Council President Tusk opposed Trump's demands. A diplomat told this publication the evening was tense. Most of the leaders insisted on this being a family, a club, a community of liberal democracies, and for that reason they said you cannot allow President Putin, who does not represent that, back in. Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte was reportedly the only G7 leader to support Trump's position. But I find this particularly fascinating given that Trump has just been raked over the coals by the American media for his alleged collusion with Russia, which we know is non-existent. I thought this was a courageous and principled act on his part, and I support it. Meanwhile, the Iranian Prime Minister Zarif arrived as a surprise guest. He paid an unannounced visit, but it was at the invitation of French President Macron, who was seeking to facilitate dialogue between the U.S. and Iran. American officials told Reuters his appearance caught them by surprise. Trump declined to comment on the matter, but he's revealed he encouraged Macron to go ahead with continuing talks. Trump purportedly said it was too soon, premature for the U.S. delegation, but I think nothing is too soon if you're going to avoid war. Scott, your comments on the situation.
Yeah, the G7 was a very interesting event because Macron, really could have, if he was smarter, he could have had all of the G7 leaders giving their testimony to Trump, and they could have advised and informed and enlightened Trump in their own personal way. That's the benefit of having people and the chemistry and the feedback and the dialogue and joint statements, because it would give Trump some food for thought on his own calculation of his policy statements and stuff, rather than thinking that he can bulldoze over people, and that's just a delusion. So Macron was, I think Trump, I watched the news conference this morning, And I think Trump had good chemistry. I honestly thought his statements about Iran were very backtracking, and that he seems to be bending over backward, to say he wants a deal, to say he wants to come to the table, he wants dialogue, to say that he doesn't want regime change. He said, quote, we've seen how that works over the last 20 years, meaning it results in ruin and destruction. So he's saying the right things with regards to Iran. He said the right thing with regards to Russia as well. The Russia should be returned to the G7 and make it the G8. The entire reason that they annexed Russia was because they, quote, Russia annexed Ukraine, which was not true. If we all remember Crimea. Let's all remember the history lesson. Victoria Nuland of the Obama administration went over and forced a CIA-led coup d'etat in Ukraine, overthrowing Yanukovych, and then incidentally worked with the Ukrainian officials that were then implanted on the anti-Trump propaganda. And Michael Isikoff, the same CIA, NBC News, Yahoo News reporter, went over there and played a part in that. Michael Isikoff interviewed me for 2 hours on Shell Game and asked me, why do you think the CIA would do this? So I know he's CIA, but that's the Ukraine situation, that we overthrow Yanukovych and put in Poroshenko, the puppet, who was anti-Russian. And that caused the people in Crimea to fear for their lives and their language and their culture, and the people in Donbass. So they returned Crimea to Russia, as it had been previously designated a Russian territory before the 1950s, when Russia gave it to Ukraine. So history is totally lopsided. Oliver Stone goes through a lot of that in his Putin interviews. But the G7 and European leaders are historically ignorant or malicious to have done that based on that rationale. And of course, we understand historically Germany and France and Britain and they have sort of a snobbishness towards Russia and historical insecurity based on the Napoleonic Wars and communism and the Berlin airlift wall. But it's interesting. We're doing to other countries in sanctions the same thing that we accused Russia, the communists, of doing in Berlin in 1945. The communists cut off all food and water and medicine to East Germany, and we had to fly planes over. Well, we're cutting off all food, water, medicine, and fuel to certain countries, and they're having to airlift because of our strangulation, whether it's Venezuela or Iran. And finally, Iran coming over, I thought was a brilliant move by both Macron and Zarif, and I think it caught Trump off guard. And I said Zarif should have went right up to the press and said, I'm here because Mr. Trump invited me to call him. And I thought instead of picking up the phone, I'd just show up. I'm calling his bluff. I'm taking him up on his offer. What is he, a coward or a liar? Which is it? Because either way, he should hop to a telephone and have that answer my call. And I also said I hope Zarif goes over there to seek a meeting, to set up another meeting about a deal and make a secret deal within that deal, and then make a transparent deal to cover the whole thing up. That's an opportunity for Trump to engage the Iranians, or engage Zarif, if he has honest motives. But of course, the problem is the Zionist elements around him, Munkin and all of these Zionist elements are going to push as hard as they can to disrupt any favorable talks or negotiations between Iran and the United States. And they're going to continue to push for isolation and war. And I think you see that with what Netanyahu's doing now. So we'll see how Trump plays this. But this morning, I thought he was milding down. He was kind of deflating, and he was not on the war rhetoric and the hysteria. I thought it was a good sign. It could be better, but it was a good sign that Trump was mild. Jim?
I watched it as well, Scott, and I agree with your assessment. It was, in my opinion, a positive development. Now, I do not know if it's related, but this is a very disturbing report that Donald Trump converted to Judaism 2 years before this article appeared in 2019. That would be in 2017. President Donald Trump converted to Judaism 2 years ago and joined the Chabad Lubavitch Synagogue in New York City, according to a high-level White House official. The story has allegedly been held by CNN editors for months, due to be released in the next few days, but it did not happen. David Elias Goldberg, a fellow at the Jewish Center of Anti-Semitic Study, has also interviewed the White House source. According to the source, and you're going to hear from her momentarily, Trump was pushed by Ivanka and Jared Kushner to join the faith. At first, he resisted, saying it could threaten his base of evangelical Christian voters.
Yep.
He had a change of heart and officially converted in early 2017.
Oh, no.
The ceremony was held in private and closely guarded for nearly 2 years, actually longer. It appears the White House is prepared to slowly release this information, and by summer, he's expected to fully address his new faith. Except this article was published in 2019, and this is the first we're learning about it. Here's an interview. This takes about 5 minutes, but its significance is so stunning. I want us to all have the opportunity to hear.
Listen closely.
Goldberg again. If you've been paying attention to my channel, if you've been listening to what's going on, you know that I was poisoned. I had arsenic poisoning about 2 weeks ago. I'm doing much better, but they seem to be very nervous about what I'm revealing on my channel. We have inside information. We have secret information that no one knows. First of all, Donald Trump converted to Judaism 2 years ago. Secondly, Donald Trump believes that Jared Kushner is the Mashiach or the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah. No one knows information. Beyond that, we are learning more and more about what's going on in the White House because of the person who I've been communicating with, who worked there, Isabel. Unfortunately, Isabel has been fired. They figured it out. They found out that she was talking to me. We've been getting a hold of news agencies. They won't talk to us. I know a lot of people. I know people at CNN. I know people at the New York Times. I know people at the New Yorker. I know people at the New York Post. I've been talking to them, communicating with them. A lot of them are really good people, and I've known them for 25 years, but now they won't publish this information. There's something going on, and I'm starting to question my own people. I'm starting to question the Jews and the Zionists in the White House. They are not working for an agenda that I can be a part of anymore, and I'm very concerned. Now, I have Isabel on the phone. Isabel, are you there?
Hi, David. Yeah, I'm here.
Good. I can hear you pretty well. I think this is going to be okay. Isabel, it's true that you were fired last week. That is correct.
Unfortunately, that is the case, yes.
Okay. How do you feel about that?
I'm not happy. It's lit a fire under my ass, though. You know, it really makes me want to get this information out all the more. I really feel that I did the right thing. And it just angered people.
Well, clearly they're upset with you. They're not happy with what you did. You revealed a lot of very, very sensitive information about Trump and Kushner and what's going on. What I can't believe as a Jew, I'm very proud of all of this. I was very happy to hear that Trump converted to Judaism, but it's becoming clear
That's cool.
that they don't want this information out. Is that your assessment?
But if you are proud to be a Jew, I don't want you to be a Jew. Am I wrong?
Say that again. What?
I mean, if you're not going to be proud to be a Jew, personally, I don't want you to be one of them.
Right,
I mean, am I wrong here?
No, you're not wrong, and I'm very proud, but I'm seeing that my own people are working against us. I feel like people in the White House are not working in our favor. There's some kind of agenda going on. I mean, they just tried to kill me. They just tried to kill me, and they have poisoned me, and they have fired you, and they're blocking SUVs.
Yeah, I mean, I said before, but I just want to say it again. I'm worried about you, and I'm so sorry that this has happened.
Well, it's a shock to my system. I've been fighting for Jewish issues. I've been fighting against anti-Semitism my entire life. I know a lot of wonderful Jews here in New York, but now I'm seeing a different side of things. They want to shut me up. The people in the press won't talk to me, and they won't publish the story anymore. I've been able to get stories published for 25 years. And now this happens, and everyone goes silent, and then they fire you, and our channel is being attacked by anti-Semites. There's something very strange going on. The White House doesn't want this information out.
Right. Yeah.
This is terrible.
Well, this is very terrible, yes. Isabel, thank you for joining me. I know you're under a lot of stress. Is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything else? What did they say to you when they fired you?
Well, they said that they knew what I was up to. You know, they said that I had signed non-disclosure agreements. I had broken that contract. I would be lucky if I wasn't sued.
Right.
You know, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. I did sign NDA. I did.
That's
But
true.
that needs to be known.
It does need to be known. I'm not surprised that eventually this might happen, but I'm so disappointed in the White House. Why do they want to cover up that Trump is a Jew? Why do they want to cover up that Trump thinks
He should be proud of
is the Messiah?
But it's like this got to be
Why are they
He
covering it
wants
up?
to be reelected.
He wants to be reelected.
But
They must feel this is going to hurt him.
him.
This is going to hurt him so bad if they don't want the information out. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Isabel, thank you for joining me. For anybody else listening, please, I need your support. We need to get the information out. Donald Trump is a Jew. Donald Trump believes Kushner is the Messiah, and there's all kinds of other things going on. Thank you for joining me. We'll get up another video soon.
Now, this appears to be stunning confirmation. David Goldberg found dead in his New York apartment after predicting Iran war false flags. This is dated June 11th, 2019. The death is being investigated. Authorities have given no indication as to the cause of death. He was only 59. Friends of Mr. Goldberg believe he was murdered and did not pass away of natural causes.
Oh.
Do not believe it would be for exposing false flags to initiate an Iran war, but for revealing that Donald Trump had converted to Judaism. At this time, they're revealing documents in his possession, some of which appear to be top secret, and White House memos, much of which he's posted on his YouTube account, relates to the upcoming planned Iran war, which will be precipitated by a series of false flags conducted by the U.S. and Israel. Mr. Goldberg's Iran war false flag video was posted first on April 14, 2019, titled White House Insider, Tactical Nukes and Ground Invasion Planned for Iran, as well as many subsequent videos. This blog post on April 18, 2019 offered further details on the plan for the war. He also has another. Since originally posting the videos, the New York Times confirmed a month later Mr. Goldberg's prediction that the White House was planning to use exactly 120,000 ground troops for the invasion. Mr. Goldberg had based his info on secret memos given him by his White House source, who's been featured in a number of his videos. Meanwhile, we have a piece by D.C. Martin about Israel's Murder Incorporated, the assassination of James Forrestal, and of other political figures, indeed, including their participation in the assassination of JFK. Scott, I'm very keen to have your remarks about this. It seems to me that Trump is, of course, entitled to convert to Judaism, but he has an obligation to inform the American people. It's a political ramifications. It has nothing to do with being proud or not proud of being a Jew, but how the American people are going to react to such a volatile transformation taking place before their very eyes.
Well,
Yeah,
if we look at it two different ways, let's look at it as if it's true and as well as if it's false. If it's true, if Donald Trump has converted to Judaism, and this is accurate, and putting aside these people who did this video and did they work for the president or the woman, was she fired, is that true? That's a separate analysis. There's some weirdness about that whole presentation and that audio. But let's just say that it is true that Donald Trump converted to Judaism. I agree with you, Jim. This would be very, very destructive, if not annihilate his presidential campaign for a variety of reasons. And we have to gauge the temperament, the disposition of the American people as a whole. Number one, they've never voted for a Jewish president before, so this is a paradigm shift. They voted for a paradigm shift under Obama. It was a disaster. I think that it makes them gun shy. and they're not inclined to rush into that again. There are prejudices, there are ancient dislikes, there are suspicions about Jewish organization or tribalism or fraternity or whatever you want to call it, the myths of or the truths of money hoarding and oppression and a lot of distasteful things. So we're looking at the negatives, of course. So for Trump to say that he's converted instantly puts him in a category that is not attractive instantaneously. Plus, his foreign policy now suddenly makes all the more sense. And it suddenly becomes militant Zionism rather than American constitutionalism. So now people are really upset because the entire reason that they voted for him was to get us out of the Middle East wars. And now they see that he's Jewish. And that means he's blood genetically, tribally, politically, a dual Israeli citizen. And he is doing Israel's warmongering agenda. He's not doing the American agenda. He's throwing American kids into the war machine to advance Israel's agenda because of his personal religious agenda or delusion. That's the other calculation. That's the other check that will be manifested is people will have a violent aversion to this because of his foreign policy. Right now they've been trying to figure it out, but if he says he's a Jew, then it suddenly becomes clear. And then the final element I would say is the sense of betrayal. The betrayal is he said he's an evangelical. The betrayal is he said Christians praying over him. The betrayal is he says he believes in the Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and has given his life to him and has been given redemption for his sins and eternal life through Christ. That's entirely different from the Judaism of the Old Testament Torah and the belief of just doing good and being nice. There is no afterlife. There is no eternity in the Judaism as I understand it and have read. So Jewishness, Judaism, that the whole religion is nihilism eventually. So it's quite different than Christianity. Christianity is the end of Judaism and the start of eternity through Christ. It's the story from Adam to Christ and then eternity. So Judaism is seen as a stunted cult-like religion that should have ended with the fulfillment of Christ and has continued in a cult-like political machination. And then there's all sorts of historical analysis of how that's manifested, from whether it's the Jewish bankers or whether it's Rothschilds and Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group. There's all sorts of other little rabbit trails, Henry Ford's The Eternal Jew. There's so much out there that feels bad and that stinks like sewer water. And again, the American public don't need to know all of this stuff. They just have to smell it. Does it pass the smell test? No, it won't. It'll smell like sewer water, and they'll go, "Oh my God, he told me he was a Christian. That's a lie. He told me he was going to get us out of the Middle East wars. Now I know why he's not. That's a lie." And this whole Jewishness, now you're going against people's ancient prejudices that have been handed down. And a lot of these prejudices are rooted in fact. This is not a bunch of angry white Nazi people missing teeth and covered in tattoos up in Idaho or South Dakota. No, there are a lot of prejudices that are based on real truth and real behavior and real facts that have offended people. The same thing, when people characterize blacks in the ghetto and have an aversion to their behavior because they suspect criminality, a lot of that is based on personal experience and facts too. Prejudice as a political theory is very rooted in facts and personal experiences. So despite the modern political correctness trying to outlaw it, it doesn't anthropologically work. Everybody makes prejudices based on their experiences. You just have different gradations of it, different colors. So I think Trump, if this is true, it will, I think, ruin his presidency. I think it'll destroy it. No one will vote for him, or they'll feel so betrayed, they'll pick up their ball and bat and leave the field. Now, if it's not true, if this is fake, if this is not real, if these people are fake or some sort of operation or just lunatics, then we'll see Trump's. We'll see it go nowhere. It won't go anywhere, and Trump will come out. I am a born again, Christian, and I believe in freedom of religion, but I am a solid Christian, and I stand with your moral values. He needs to be very clear on that if he's truthfully that, because that will solidify his base. And if he doesn't, and if he thinks he can get away with some sort of middle of the road, I'm half a Jew and half a Christian, I think that would work against him too. I think people are very skeptical, if not offended, by Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. There's something about these people that no one likes. Ivanka Trump has never had to work a day in her life, and yet she's all over the place heralding women in the workplace. Well, you're talking a bunch of bull and theory, Ivanka, because you've never had to go out and be a waitress to make the rent and pay for your kids' clothes. You've never had to really work. You've kind of done it like a Barbie doll boutique. But people who've really had to work, it's an entirely different thing, and it's not fun for a lot of women who've been abandoned or abused or whatever meaning they go into the workforce. So Ivanka Trump has got problems. And she also has problems when she comes running to Trump saying there were chemical attacks in Syria and little kids were killed. And all of that was lies, and Trump fires 58 Tomahawk missiles over to Syria. I don't care if he did it and missed people intentionally. He should never have done it in the first place. That was the first violation of his promise. And then Jared Kushner and all his shenanigans. He's never been in the military. He's never been in the State Department. He's never had a top secret clearance. He's never done anything in the government. This guy is a corrupt official with a corrupt family. So all of the background about the corruption and the mafiosiness of Trump and his family could catch up to him. And if it comes out that he's a Jewish mafia, he's done. He's ended. It's Kennedy 1964 all over again, Jim.
And of course, he mentioned the chemical attack in Syria during his press conference this morning.
Yeah.
Don, go ahead. Add a few thoughts, Don.
They're not going to be good thoughts if this is real. I mean, if this is true, this is not what we want here in America at all. Hopefully it's going to wash away, but I just don't. Who do you trust? Who's your enemy out there? Are they in the house with you? Go ahead.
Here's a reason why I'm inclined to believe it's true. We have an obvious propaganda to counter it. Mainstream hurls fake anti-Semitism charge against Trump rather than question his real loyalty to Israel. This is from RT. The media has willfully misrepresented Donald Trump's words to portray the most pro-Israel U.S. president in history as an anti-Semite. It makes more sense to chide him for sacrificing U.S. interests to please Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's the full Trump quote from Tuesday in which he rejected Bernie Sanders' idea that Israel should stop accepting American aid in its reluctance to let in Congresswomen Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who have publicly endorsed the BDS campaign. And by the way, I believe these developments could make Bernie Sanders the next president of the United States.
Wow.
Of even talking about this even 3 years ago, of cutting off aid to Israel because of two people who hate Israel and hate Jewish people. I can't believe we're having this conversation, Trump said. Where has the Democratic Party gone? Where have they gone when they're defending these people over the state of Israel? I think any Jewish people who vote for a Democrat show either a total lack of knowledge or great disloyalty. There's no ambiguity in the quote. Trump says it's bizarre that Democrats prioritized Omar and Tlaib over maintaining Washington's historic good relation with Israel, and that those Jews who support the Democratic Party are being disloyal to either fellow Jews or the state of Israel. Trump is not using the dual allegiance trope deployed since ancient times, in which Jews living in foreign countries are accused of putting their ethnicity and religion above their citizenship, which in my opinion is a well-founded historical fact. On the contrary, he's urging American Jews to show more of a dual allegiance, to remember their roots and back their historic kin living in Israel. The media has either pretended the two sentiments are the same, or that the great disloyalty mentioned by Trump related to the U.S. itself, or to him personally, which makes no sense in the context. To perpetuate the confusion, it's leveraged Jewish voices to deliver the judgment. though notably the ostensibly neutral ones actually stopped short of calling the president an anti-Semite. The American Jewish Committee called the comments divisive. The Anti-Defamation League urged him to stop using Jews as a political football. It's the leftist Jewish organizations that have unsurprisingly joined in the chorus of condemnation, with pro-Palestinian Jewish group J Street calling them disgusting, and the Jewish Democratic Council of America, the biggest such liberal group, that has accused Trump of weaponizing anti-Semitism. In turn, Republican Jews have defended the White House. Perhaps the harshest charge that could be fairly leveled at the president is lumping together American and Israeli Jews, as when he referred to Netanyahu as your prime minister in a speech to Jewish Republicans in March, but that still doesn't make Trump an anti-Semite. Moreover, it could be argued that if anyone could be accused of having a dual allegiance, it's not American Jews, but Trump himself.
Yep.
He recognized Israel as the capital of Israel, sought to limit the definition of Palestinian refugees, cut funding for the organization that would support them, pulled the U.S. out of the Iran deal, condemned by Netanyahu, widely expected to imminently recognize permanent Israeli claims to Jewish settlement in the West Bank. Whether he's done this because of his affinity with the prime minister with whom he shares political DNA, or as a principled ideological stance, he has risked his relationship with Europe, the Muslim world, and international bodies at every turn. Here we get a typical cartoon. Trump says, jump, Netanyahu asks how high. It's the other way around, really. Finally, no wonder that he is surprised despite all this. Nearly 4 in 5 Jews continue to vote Democrat, despite most telling pollsters they feel close ties to their ancestral homeland. American outlets occasionally challenge Trump's unabashed support of Israel, part of its campaign to portray him as a dangerous maverick in the international arena. But the media also wants to keep the anti-Semitism card in its back pocket at all times, pulling it out as part of the increasingly relentless drive to portray himself as a white supremacist baiting racist. While the foreign policy criticism is more substantive, the race stuff is juicier and sells better to a domestic American audience. But by alternating between calling him a crazed Zionist and an anti-Semite, the media has diffused the power of its indiscriminate assault on Trump, shown itself to have less consistency and integrity than the U.S. president, and given him an oddly easy ride on his Middle East policy. Scott.
Well, that last point is great, Jim. I think you're absolutely right. The mainstream media is in its final death throes of madness, like a dog that's chasing its tail and foaming at the mouth and rolling on its back in just this howling demonstration of mental disintegration, like they're suffering mad cow disease. So is Como and Rachel Maddow and all of these clowns and traitors and scumbags. And I mean, every American should be morally disgusted and offended and want to grab them by the throat and throttle them for the last 2.5 years of saying that the president has been conniving and conspiring with the secret Communist Party to take over America. That's essentially what it was, and it was all lies. But it sends shockwaves. I guarantee you some people have had heart attacks. I guarantee you some people have had strokes. I guarantee you some people have been deeply scared and offended and troubled and traumatized by the mainstream media's propaganda. So this isn't just kid and games and wink and nod and laugh and, oh, yeah, there's a big nothing burger. No, there's people who've really suffered from this propaganda. That's what psychological warfare does, and that's what this was. It impacts behavior by manipulating the emotions, and you have an entire physiological change in the person, sometimes permanent. So the mainstream media has done a great crime, and they should be investigated, and they need to be investigated for the taking of bribes, incidentally, that they took, and apart from the DOJ, FBI coup d'etat they were planning. Remember, many of these journalists took bribes from DOJ and such. But besides the mainstream media melting down and losing all of its credibility, Trump's main problem in his whole foreign policy and really his core identity, if he had not gone down this road of Jewishness, of Israel, of Zionism, of all that stuff that Adelson basically bought him and treated him like a whore, And there's all sorts of allegations. He's been a whore for a long time in New York, and the Jewish mafia and the Italian mafia and all that stuff. Hey,
Wow.
whatever you did back then, you know, even little girls and all that, and the pedophile stuff with Epstein, you know, that's left behind. When you're president of the United States, you represent the American people, you represent the Constitution, you represent Americans overseas to other countries. And that was really originally the prime job of the president. Yes, he was chief executive, but in 1800, we didn't have an overwhelming number of federal agencies. The federal government didn't have any real role in effect on people's lives. It was the state government. But so the president didn't lord over the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Labor, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, and all these other things. And if there were some of these agencies, they had a small group of people that were appointed as the political operatives of those agencies. Remember, the spoil system used to be in place, I think it was before the early 1900s, and that was everybody was appointed as part of the political victory of a campaign. You didn't have an entrenched bureaucracy. You didn't have a deep state before the spoil system was removed, and then it came to be the merit system. I studied all this when I was doing my master's. So the merit system implanted a permanent bureaucracy because they are the technocrats who knew how to pull the levers of big government. And look what it's done. It's created a deep state that has brought to fruition the fears of every American, a totalitarian deep state run by a few. Now, Trump's Zionist claims and statements, he is suffering from this simple delusion. He is conflating Jewishness with Israel and Zionism. And those are three different things that need to be compartmentalized. Jewishness is whatever right you want to practice Jewishness or Zoroastrianism or Buddhism or Christianity, that's up to your walk with God. I don't care. That's between you and the Almighty. But when you begin to organize or conspire and take action to prejudicially impact or rob or hurt other people, now you're gearing up for a conflict, war, civil war, whatever it may be. So Jewishness is religion. Israel, of course, was the Old Testament city that was based and rooted in the Torah, Jewish religion, Hebrew, then Christianity, and now after 1948, it was resurrected and given to the quote people claiming to be Jews by the Balfour Amendment, and the British recognized Palestine as the state of Israel. So they were sending all the Jews, or allowing all the Jews who wanted to go there, who first wanted to go to Africa. And then they changed that and said we can plant ourselves if we have a religious anchor. So they moved people to Israel. And then you have the emergence of Zionism, which is a militant apartheid ideology, political ideology, which seems to be trying to run and manage and engage in global foreign policy operations to the detriment of other nations, in the affirmative and the benefit of a cabal of not religious God-fearing people, but of political atheists or machinations. So Trump has made the mistake of saying, if you're Jewish, you should love Israel. No, I was in Iran, and there's a lot of Jewish rabbis who have nothing to do and want nothing to do with Israel or Zionism, because they recognize that Israel was disintegrated in 70 AD, and Zionism is a political monstrosity that bastardizes the Jewish religion. So Trump has fallen into the Christian Zionism delusion that Jewishness equals Israel and Israel equals Zionism, and all three equal the other side of the American coin, and it does not. And Trump has been, I think it's out of ignorance, but if it's, as you said before, Jim, out of dual loyalty to a dual citizenry because of a new converted religious ideology, he's done. He's walking the plank. But I would like to hope that it's just ignorance, and that he recognizes and comes back to reality and says, Israel and Zionism and Jewishness has nothing to do with the U.S. Constitution and government and the people who pay taxes. It's entirely about America. And if I start putting my America into making deals and alliances with Israel, like Lindsey Graham is trying to do, which says if the Israelis go over and engage in military fights, the Americans are going to come in and defend them. Now we've got potentially World War III, and we got lots of kids getting killed and butchered, and no one's going to tolerate that. I guarantee if that started unraveling and getting out of control, Trump's whole family would go the way of the dodo. I think that's how upset people potentially can get. Jim?
I think allegations of Trump being anti-Semitic are so absurd that anyone who makes them is just, trying to create some kind of political cover. When I read the Fire and Fury book by Michael Wolff about the administration before he had been elected, I was profoundly troubled that every key advisor was a rabid Zionist. Every one of them, Scott.
Right.
So I think this has been a serious problem for Trump from the beginning, and it may be manifesting here. I believe this story is true. It's been picked up by other websites and blogs. Henry Makow has a piece about it. I was just catching now. That seems consistent with the David Goldberg report of the conversion, and the death is a form of retaliation. The Israelis play hardball when they are revealed, and this could cost them a lot of political clout. So I think it's obvious, although we had this old Jewish woman who'd worked for the administration saying he should be proud to be a Jew, and she doesn't want him to be a Jew if he's not proud to be a Jew. Politically, under the circumstances with the complexity of the situation in the Middle East, it reveals him to be a traitor to the United States. It has nothing to do with being proud to be a Jew. It has to do with his loyalty to the United States and his claim to make America great again, which many of us have worried really meant make Israel great again.
Wow, that's something else. You guys are spot on, folks. You got to share this. I don't think you can hear this anywhere else. I think it's pretty desperate. Which side are we on, folks? Where are we going?
I think you got it right. Meanwhile, Piers Morgan has been reported during an interview he gave that the media has turned left, and the left has become unbearable. Dr. Ewan Fellowship of the Mind has put together a very nice blog about it. Piers Morgan, 54, is an English journalist, broadcaster, and TV personality. Dr. Ewan, was no fan of him. He was especially loathsome when he hosted Piers Morgan Live on CNN from 2011 to 2014, after which he returned to the UK. On the Ben Shapiro show last Sunday, August 18th, however, he launched into a stinging critique of the contemporary left, which had gone viral on Twitter, which just goes to show even a self-identified pro-gun control liberal like Piers Morgan has had enough with so-called liberals. This is him. I think a lot of people who should be impartial journalists and masquerade as impartial journalists are now drifting toward being celebrities. And right now in America, in Trump's America, the only way to be a celebrated journalist is predominantly to be a liberal Trump-hating journalist, and that's where it gets dangerous. When I look at CNN, for example, when I was there, the standards and practices found around impartiality was extremely rigorously enforced. You could not remotely be seen to be partial politically. Now, I look at CNN, I see open sneering at Trump 24/7. Things have changed. When I was there, you couldn't do that. And I think it's problematic. America needs CNN to be impartial. You have MSNBC on the left, you have Fox on the right. People have always understood that. If CNN itself becomes partial and partisan, I find that a big problem. I've never known it like it is now. And I think it's been massively exacerbated by social media. I feel we've gone back 2,000 years, back into tribes. You have it with Trump here in America where it's just blind. You have to be one tribe or another. You're not allowed to actually say, well, on the one hand, he's done good things here, here, here. On the other hand, I don't like what he's doing there. It's everything about this man, everything he doesn't say. And every time he breaks wind, it offends me. Or I just love him and everything he says is fantastic, even when he does things that are ridiculous. The most important to maintain is the ability to have democratic debate with people, sit with people you don't agree with and listen to the things you find offensive, but you actually respect their right to think differently than you do. It's the inability to have a debate without waiting to cancel people, to wrench their lives, to make them lose their jobs. You're referring to universities in the UK and Berkeley deplatforming speakers, not allowing invited speakers to speak. What is the point of being a university if you're not going to be there to challenge and have your own views challenged? Meanwhile, a study has confirmed what we've been saying all along. CNN, MSNBC push biased news. This is now confirming what Piers Morgan was reported. Conservatives have long contended broadcast and cable news are biased in their reporting, but the networks dismiss it as baseless. Now the Media Research Center has data that proves what those on the right knew from experience. The Media Research Center study shows CNN and MSNBC host Democratic representatives and senators 7 times more frequently than their Republican counterparts. The study also shows even when networks like CNN interviews a Republican, they use Democratic talking points as a basis for their questioning. To compile the report, they randomly selected 3 weeks of every broadcast on CNN and MSNBC from 6 a.m. to midnight Eastern. The weeks January 7 through 11, March 25 to 29, and June 10 to 14, after 540 hours of programming to consider. MSNBC was the most partisan. It interviews congressional Democrats 13 times more than their Republican counterparts. During those sample weeks, MSNBC featured 148 Democrats, but only 11 Republicans. CNN wasn't much better, with a ratio of 136 Democrats and 29 Republicans. Although Republicans hold the majority of the Senate, 87% of interviews by the two networks were of Democrats. Of the 103 interviews considered, 90 were with Democrats, just 10 with Republicans. This disparity is made worse by the fact mainstream media journalists do not conduct equally hard-hitting interviews with both sides. CNN and MSC routinely ask adversarial questions of Republicans that favor the Democrat agenda. When those networks feature Republican panelists, they are never Trumpers like Bill Kristol. The methodology used here by this media research group is that an agenda question was defined in one in which the interviewee uses recognizable talking points from the opposing party. Republican guests were posed with a total of 310 questions, in which over half reflected the agenda of one party or the other. That's where fair and balanced ended. Of the 156 questions that reflected the agenda of one party, 97% reflected an adversarial Democratic agenda. Only 4 questions showed a friendly or Republican agenda. Democrats experienced markedly more hospitable questions. Of the 660 questions identified of having a partisan tilt out of 1,653 total, 535 or 81% were based on a friendly Democratic agenda, while the remaining 25 or 19% asked the Democrats to respond to an adversarial Republican agenda. Meanwhile, Democratic presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard hit the Democratic National Committee over its polling criteria for the coming primary debates, asking it to ensure transparency and fairness in selecting the qualifying surveys. Get this. The campaign noted that Gabbard has exceeded 2% support in 26 national and early state polls, but said only 2 of those 26 are on the DNC certified list.
Really?
Even though many of the uncertified polls, including those conducted by highly reputable organizations like The Economy and The Economist and the Boston Globe, are ranked by Real Clear Politics and 538 as more accurate than some of the DNC certified polls. I think Tulsi has a point. Scott.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, I think Tulsi Gabbard, like Ron Paul has said, like Senator Dick Black has said, is a very viable candidate, a very, decent and honest woman. And we may not agree with her on everything, but we certainly do agree with her in some things, and specifically being a major in the Army National Guard in Hawaii gives her enormous credentials in my mind, as well as being a surfer. The surfers have a certain, live and let live attitude, which is extremely healthy. People don't understand that. Yeah, I'm from California, but when there's a relaxation to her, there's a calming, and there's a disposition of a detachment that is very critical. You don't want to get people impulsive and firing 58 missiles into Syria or anywhere else. You kind of want to lay back. So she has enormous attractiveness as a potential presidential candidate. Now, the reverberations and destabilization she's caused within the Democrat establishment is obvious by their prejudice and their attempt to keep her out. But I think, people like you and I, Jim and Don, should have her on our radio shows and television shows.
Yes.
Her
I've
staff
invited her.
and say,
It might be a tad too controversial for Tulsi at this point in time.
yeah,
Written to her about the Second Amendment because she needs to be better educated about the defensive use of guns and why it makes such a difference to protect American lives, estimated around 200,000 every single year.
yeah, and the psyops that are now we're seeing coming out, Jim, and I think you shared that great video of the police officers dousing themselves with blood in the Pennsylvania or wherever that shooting.
Philadelphia, yeah.
2 cops. I mean, talk about something that is so obscene and offensive it makes you want to vomit when you see that police officers who've sworn an oath to protect and defend, and then they're visually caught on camera spraying themselves with some kind of blood. You see it spilling onto the ground, and they're doing it like they're putting shaving cream on their arms, and it's all red. I mean, this is not America anymore. This is not a country that has laws or government. This is a country that the only way to vomit this out is through a civil war. And I can't see another way around it, because we've got effeminate leaders in the political circles, in the religious pulpits and churches, and now we've got these politicians who are just totally betraying the American people. So the civil war is coming. If it's not, it's already here, because of these things that the police are doing, the red flag laws, the confiscation, the attempted confiscation of guns, demonizing guns through these fake events. Tulsi needs to be educated, of course, all of that, or else you're on the side of liars. The media doesn't surprise us, but let's remember this. Over 50 years, Jim, you've seen a greater transformation of culture than I have. But if you remember, like in the 1950s, you didn't have the hostility towards marriage or men. You didn't have women covered in tattoos or piercings in every orifice. You didn't have men the same way. You didn't have the rampant homosexuality. You didn't have transgenderism or transvestitism. Yes, you may have had a little bit here and there in the dark corners of decrepitude, but it wasn't rampant like a plague. And 50 years later in America, we've got all of these pathologies, these problems, these mental, schizophrenic, emotional, sexual breakdowns occurring. So it doesn't surprise me that the toxins of these beliefs in this cultural impregnation of culture with these poisonous beliefs have created a media that is similarly schizophrenic and lacking and void of all sense of truth and honor and ethics and reporting and substance. They are the same as these degenerate elements in society. There's no difference between Cuomo or these other people on CNN that are looking all pretty with fancy hairdos and suits. There's no difference between these Barbie doll, Ken doll puppets on media and some homeless, drug addict, needle in the arm, or Antifa lunatic zombie defecating in the street. There's no difference, because they're one and the same ideologically. They feed off of each other. One has them on the show, and the other one throws bricks through anybody's windows and yells at them in restaurants if they dare not watch the show or share their allegiance or those sort of things. So we're seeing society break up with the crazies on one side, and then those of us who are separating, be ye separate. Come out from among them and be ye separate. We're doing that. So there's a great divorce or a great civil war, but there's a great separation, Jim.
Well,
real quickly, CNN, they just hired somebody who was in the Russian gate thing. What was his name?
Andrew McCabe.
McCabe, that's the right word.
What an
what credibility is that?
Decision.
I know, credibility down the tube. And I guess I've been deprived that when I grew up in and have all this stuff.
So I just have here's a recent essay by John Kaminsky about puppets for president. Why people don't vote, because Jews have final say on who becomes our leaders. I mean, I never used to think these thoughts at all, but there appears to be a mountain of evidence for it. Something happened after September 11 that has changed the nature of the USA. Maybe it just accelerated a process that's been long developing but had yet to emerge into full view. The exact moment came when George W. Bush stood in front of the ruins of the World Trade Center and said to the world, they hate our freedom. And suddenly the brains of all Americans were damaged when they accepted his ridiculous assertion as a true explanation for the disaster, because it wasn't. Meanwhile, regarding Tulsi Gabbard and Ron Paul, Representative Tulsi Gabbard seems the only semi-legit candidate among the field of radical Democratic communists running for president in the 2020 election. But it's already obvious she suffers from the same Jewish media-induced disease that scuttled the recent presidential candidacy of Maverick, Texas Representative Ron Paul. In 2 elections, in fact, despite that in both races he was a clear popular favorite of the American people who turned out in droves to boost his campaign. Instead, the Jewish media tried to convince us we wanted fixer Mitt Romney and mobster John McCain. And instead, we got the mysterious Barack Obama, not even a U.S. citizen, shoved down our throats. Gabbard destroyed media darling Kamala Harris in a recent debate. Yet the Jewish networks now declare Harris a favorite and Gabbard an also-run. The media spooks at Jew-run CNN continue to berate Gabbard as a traitor for visiting Syrian President Assad in an attempt to get a better idea of what was actually happening to yet another country Israel was trashing with U.S. troops. For this, Gabbard is declared an enemy. Of course, when McCain went over to abet the creation of ISIS as part of the U.S. attempt at regime change in Syria, the Jewish media praised his visit. Here we have 2 glaring examples among many of how the Jewish media determine who becomes the American president by controlling the narrative of all public media in the U.S. and even around the world to a great extent. The most glaring example of this ubiquitous campaign is positioning black men and white women on every single newscast in the nation, as well as all the positioning of characters in advertising of every type, which has just dumbfounded me. The subtle promotion of miscegenation as a way to undermine the social structure of white countries. Before we turn to our next story, Don, I think the time has come. I think we're about there for our break. So you may want to say a few words yourself.
I will really have about a minute to go, so if you want to make a 30-second comment. Otherwise.
Well, remember, it's when he talks about the Jewish-dominated media, I have shown again and again these panels of 100 executives from CNN, every one of whom is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, 100 panels from NBC, executives, every one of whom is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, 100 executives from the New York Times, every one of whom is a dual U.S. Israeli citizen. We have a major problem in the U.S., and it has to do with manipulating American politics, but it has nothing to do with Russia.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, wow, this is some fantastic information here on Truth versus News here for August 26th. And also, I think my show could also be called Truth versus Official Facts and Acts, because those official facts like Oswald killing Kennedy are facts, man. But anyways, this is the end of the first hour. Stay tuned. We're going to have the second hour coming up. If you think this is hot, hold on to your hats. So we'll do a stopping right now. Come on.